Hello, everyone. I am Philip Austin, manager of NGK Training and Development, and I am partnering with Pico Technologies. I have Randy Dillman here, where he is going to be taking the realm of presenting the PicoScope P7 software. So, the PicoScope is a PC-based oscilloscope. Most of you that are on the line here attended this webinar is fully aware of that, but with so much different software updates and coming from the 6 software to the 7 software, there's just time for us to ease our minds and come together and get a refresher. So with that being said, I'd like to hit it over to Randy and we could get started here. We have a couple of poll questions too we're going to plug in as we go along the way. But as everyone is registering as a live attendee at this point, we'll just give another 30 seconds for that, and we'll hand off to Randy in the next 30 seconds here. So I'd like to thank everyone for being on this webinar, and before I hand it off to Randy, as we're getting more attendees populating in, what do we say we kick off these polls here?
Sounds good.
All right, so let's. All right, so first poll here. What is your comfort zone when using the PicoScope 7 software? We'd like to keep this very interactive, sets a tone for our future webinars together. I'm just going to turn off my camera here in order to help with this. All right. Okay. Looking good. Got 4% comfortable. I welcome a refresher for this session like that. All right. 16% somewhat comfortable, but would like to fill in the blanks, and 69% not that experienced, would like to be more experienced. Love it, love it. And 8%, I'm currently using the Pico 6 software and open to learning more about the 7. So we got about 80% of you that voted. We don't want to take too much time, but thank you for that. I'm going to close the poll out. All right, and also share that with everyone. This is what we got so far. So this is what you're looking at, Randy.
Okay.
All right. Great. Thanks for participating. All right. Now for the second part of this, I'm just going to hide that, and that one's been closed out. The next one basically is for the next one that we're going to do here, we want to set the tone. We don't know everyone's schedule, but we like to be as flexible as we can. So at this point, like to get an idea for when we do part 2, because it's going to be slightly longer. It's going to take on some advanced conversations on the settings and the tips. And always keep in mind that even if you can't make it, watching the recording will be available to you, but we definitely want to get this out of the way. All right, looks like the majority is okay with that midday lunchtime, and 25% about is okay with either way. So I'm going to quickly close that poll out. We got that information there, and that's what we're looking at, Randy. So
sounds good.
We'll be good to go. All right, it's all you, Randy. Thank you. And we could flip to you. Get started.
Okay, sounds good. First off, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for Philip and NGK for having me here today. We will plan on part 1 today, which is the basics of PS7 and a little bit of my background with Pico Technology. Everybody in the automotive team, there's about 6 of us total globally. I'm the only one here in North America, and we all share or wear different hats. 2 of my hats will come into play here. I am a team member of our global support team and have been since I joined 4.5 years ago. So I do about 60% or so of global tech support. And so that's going to help me here today. It really helps me to understand what the pain points are for a lot of our new users. And so we're going to talk about those pain points today. The next session next month will be certainly more advanced in the features and math channels and that type of stuff. So today is really about taking care of a lot of the pain points, a lot of the support phone calls and the emails that I get. In the chat, I did put my email address. I put my phone number, my direct phone number into our Texas headquarters. I'm not in Texas. I'm actually in northern Indiana, but I do work remote. But for our to reach me, it's a 1-800 number, extension 218. So that's also in the chat. And then to contact me via the support desk, it's support@picotech.com. So we get that out of the way. And my other role here is to provide assistance and training to our vehicle manufacturers. So as you probably well know, PicoScope is essential tools in almost every dealer in the country. Not every, but most. Certainly the vast majority of them, and the ones that we haven't deployed, we're probably in field service or we're in engineering. So we are actually in, I think, every VM in North America, one place or another, but some of them, obviously, we deploy thousands and thousands of scopes. And so that's another part of my role. So I'll be using both experiences today in order to set this class up. So we do plan on part one. I'm going to run it. I'm going to try to run it until about maybe 10 till the top of the hour. I'm not monitoring chat. I'm not monitoring questions. I'll have no idea how many of those will actually be, but we'll give ample time at the end. Now, I do want to let you know there's a lot of them, and there might be since we've got large attendance today. I'll get to every one of them. It just might not be by the top of the hour, but I will try to get to every one of them. And you can also contact me via that email, or you can call the phone number there. So I'm going to go ahead and shut my webcam off just for now, just to maybe lower the distraction. And I really want to start really right here. So I'm on our homepage at Pico Auto, and it's really important that we're going to start here, to be honest with you. As part of our support team, I've got to tell you that every week, sometimes every day, some of the problems that we run across are because Pico Technology has two websites, and that's always we had one, and then they kind of separated them, and now they are separated. So the two websites serve two completely separate communities. So if you go into a search engine and just punch in Pico Technology, most cases you'll probably wind up on the wrong website. You'll wind up on picotech.com, and that website serves all of our test and measurement customers. It's a lot of products and some stuff you probably won't recognize. And they do have a download section. And yes, you can download PS7. That's PS7 for test and measurement. No, it will not run on an automotive scope. So that's at least one support email every day, maybe more than that, or a phone call. And so we are PicoAuto.com. So please make a mental note of that. Pico Auto, it's where all the vehicle stuff is at, where our scope and accessories, and more importantly, it's where our downloads are at. So I decided to start there because that minor mistake, getting on the wrong website, really does create a lot of support tickets. I mean, literally like 10% of our support tickets, maybe more during a week, is because they've got on the wrong website and they've either downloaded the wrong software, which is obviously no big deal. We can rectify that pretty easy, or they possibly purchased the wrong equipment, and that becomes a little more complicated. So PicoAuto.com, I'm going to start here because I do want to start right over here at the downloads tab. And I do want to open that because we are talking about PS7. I get my fair share of questions about why do we have, what's the deal with the lineup? Why do we have so much software here? What do I pick if you're a new user? Why are there two PS7s? You know, what's going on there? So here's how this works. PS7 stable, which is the top one there, I consider that to be long field trim. It doesn't really move much. We have maybe 3 or 4, maybe this year we might have 5 stables that will get released this year. I think last year, I think we had 3 stables for the year. And we do that for all of our training partners and companies around the globe so that you're not constantly changing your your program, because then that creates an issue with documents and PowerPoints and stuff that aren't accurate. So that's one reason why we do it. There's multiple reasons, but that's certainly one from a training standpoint, from like what we're doing today. So stable is stable. It's been stable for a couple of years. Believe it or not, PS7 has been out 4 years, and that replaced PS6. It was out 15 years. You can notice it midway down here, PS6 is still here. There have been no significant updates PS6 since June of 2020. We did have to increment it a couple of times for safety, security reasons, and then we had to increment it one time in 2023 for a product change in one of our product lines. Otherwise than that, we're not going to do any updates in PS6. And I'll just make a long story short, the software that we designed and built it with is no longer supported, and the environment that it runs in is no longer supported by Microsoft. That was one of the reasons why the change. There was a lot of reasons why the change of PS7. It wasn't done for the fun of it, that's for sure. So it's still there. We keep it there for 32-bit machines, 32-bit Win7 or 32-bit a Win8 or something like that. I don't think you're going to find a lot of 32-bit machines past that, but because PS7 is a 64-bit application. So if you got an older scope or you got an older computer, that's still going to be the choice if it's a 32-bit machine. Otherwise than that, we do have our early access, which is really what I'm going to be using today. It's like short-term fuel trim. It's constantly moving and changing. We're always adding new features and taking care of bugs, and we increment that almost every 3 weeks on the average. So if it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that, so that number increases, and it will increase to the point where we decide to take that build, and then we'll create the new stable from that. So there's no beta software. The beta software ended almost 2 years ago. Early access is based upon the current stable, and then we make changes along the way. Sometimes minuscule changes, and this one here that we're using today, 7.126, I personally think we made the most changes in the UI in the last year off this change, and so that's one reason why I'm using it today. Otherwise than that, we do have an app for Android and for iPhones, which is a great, it's really a great learning tool, and it's a great sales guide. It's really nice to have it on the phone, and it's pretty handy. And then we've got our Millium tester. That's where we keep this is our portal, so that's where our software is for the Millium tester. And same with if you want to do any logging with your automotive scope, it can be done here. It can be done using PicoLog, and that does operate with our automotive scopes. So there's our downloads. You can, common question is, can you have both stable and early access at the same time? Absolutely, they cohabitate well together. You can only have one, not a big deal. You can run them both. And you can also run them with PS6 still installed. So you can do all of that, and they don't really stick on each other. You won't have any real issues there. Probably the only issue that we run into that commonly get asked is PS6. We did sever the link for the waveform library, and it leads me into the waveform library discussion. And so I'm going to start that right here. I'm going to go up to the top of this page here, and I'm going to go to support. And let's cover the contact information first real fast, and then we'll go where I was leading to, which is the waveform library. So you can go to the contact page here, which is office support. So right here on our home page, we have products, downloads, and support. If you mouse over support, it will open up this drop down menu, and we've got a contact information. I will let that load. And you've got two main choices, I think, for what you're typically going to run into. If you want to send an email to support@picotech.com, well, you can just send one. Just open up your own email and type in support@picotech.com. That's going to come into the support desk. I monitor those 7 days a week, and even if I don't, somebody else is going to take a look at it in case if I'm gone or something, or I'm doing something like this right now. So you can also use that form. That fills everything out. That gets all the contact information, the scope, all that kind of stuff. It's certainly more complete. Oftentimes, I just get an email to support@picotech.com, and then I have to ask some questions like, what scope are you using? What software are you using? What kind of computer do you have? I have to cover that. Some of that is covered in the form. Either way, it will get you to somebody on support. You can also call the 1-800 number there, 591-2796. and you can ask to speak to somebody on the tech side. If it's automotive, you're going to get me or get my voicemail. The box on the right, RMA, return merchandise authorization. If you have a problem with your scope, BNC is loose, or the USB port is broken, or you've got some sort of issue with a current clamp or something, you can complete the RMA form. That goes to the same place. I do RMAs for automotive for North America, so I will look over the form, probably ask a few questions just to verify I understand exactly the complaint. It's going to be handed over to my team. They will send you an RMA number, and then you will box your item up and send it to our Texas headquarters for repairs. We do all the repairs typically in Texas. There's only a few times in a month that we have to ship an item back to the UK. Pico is based in St. Neots in the UK, so it doesn't happen very often. That's also where we build some of our products. We build all the WPS products there, hoses and everything is all hand built right there in our Texas headquarters. It's really a cool place, to be honest with you. So RMA form and your support there. So I'm going to go back to the support tab and let's finish up our discussion here and then lead into the waveform library. To use the waveform library, and I've got to bring this up because Monday we released our newsletter. Our monthly newsletter comes up, which you can sign up in the news section. You can sign up there. We hit 10,000 waveforms in our waveform library. So pretty exciting for us. We did some press releases, but most of that came out on Friday. We actually did hit it about a week before, but we waited and released it in our newsletter. And so in order to use our waveform library, you do have to have an automotive scope. And currently, yes, it does need to be plugged into PS7. Will it always remain that way? I don't personally think so, but it's not going to get changed, I don't think, this year. So currently, yes, you do have to have an automotive scope plugged in. An example maybe we would plug it in, we would verify you have a scope, and then allow you a couple of logins without the scope attached, such as doing searches or research at home and you don't have the scope with you, or maybe it's not your scope and you can't take it home anyways. And so, we've looked into that, maybe a couple logins, and then you would eventually have to plug the scope back in to verify, yep, that's you and that's your scope. And that keeps that whole portal open to you, so you don't always have to have a scope. So yes, that's on the table. We've discussed it. It's not in place now. I don't think it's going to be in place in 2024, but you never do know about stuff like that, especially as fast as our product and our software engineers and stuff work. So anyways, in order to gain access to the waveform library, you're going to typically start here, believe it or not, because you do have to register for a free forum account. So I've moused mine over here to the register upper right hand corner. Once you register, it's a free account. Please safeguard the username. You can always, as a user, reset your password. You cannot reset your username and or your email address. So once the email address is put in and the username is put in, that's set in, you can't change it. You have to go through support at picotech.com, and that person, my forum administrator, he works in the UK. So 5 hours ahead of me, Eastern Standard Time. So if it's noon here, my time, it's 5 o'clock there, which means if something happens and you decide you've forgotten, and another pain point happens every day, or at least every week, that they haven't logged in for a while, they don't remember the credentials. You've got to have the username and you've got to have the email address. Anything password-wise, you can reset. Everything else, he has to reset. So please kind of keep that in mind. But you can register there. It's a pretty simple registration process. I'm doing okay on time, so I'm going to go ahead and log into it. I'm going to scroll down here to the landing page. So you can do this inside PS7 as well. You go to click on the waveform library and it says log in, please. And if you like, I don't have a login, it's got a register button. And when you click on that register button, it will link you right to this web page. It'll open up a browser and take you right to this web page. So there's our license agreement terms. I'm going to go ahead and agree to those. And this is where you're going to fill out your account. So you can put in all your username, your password, confirm your language, your time zone. Now, the last two is why I bring this up. You do have to confirm you are a genuine user. So we've selected that as no. You have to select yes. Obviously, these are anti-bot because we've always had problems with attacks on the waveform library, and they typically come from bots. So yes, that's one reason why we do that. You have to select that yes. And then the second to the last question, believe it or not, I get phone calls on or support emails. They don't understand the last question. It's basically asking you to identify the second to the last number in the list. And the answer, they tell you the answer is 8, except for they type that out as the letter 8, but they don't use the letter 8. They want you to increment that to 8 and then select that you're 16 or older, hit submit. You will get an activation email generally within 60 seconds. I wouldn't wait more than 5 minutes, and I would start looking at my spam account. Please don't wait for a day or two, because a lot of spam folders will get automatically dumped after 24 hours or at a certain time of the day. So please make sure that the activation email doesn't go into the spam folder. Otherwise than that, you'll be set up and ready to go, and you will need that information in order to log into the waveform library when you're in the PS7 software. So I do want to finish this real fast just with the forum for those of you that have been using all this and you want to do a little more of a deeper dive. Our forums, again, you don't even have to be logged in to search the forum for answers. And I think if I scroll down here to the bottom, I'm going to see there's 17,000 posts with over 21,000 members. So a lot of posts and a lot of members, and you can search them and not have to be even logged in. If you want to actually create a post or answer or write in a post, you do have to be registered. You do have to log into it. So register your account, get your activation email, and then you can log in. 2 names you want to look for when you're doing a search in our forum is Steve Smith and Ben Martins. Those are 2 of our application engineers. Barney Donahue is also one, and he'll do a little, but Steve and Ben typically do the majority of our support. Phil Rutt will put some into. Their names actually have forum admin right next to it. So a lot of the posts, believe it or not, how we typically do this is if there's something new coming out, Steve or Ben will put it in the forum first. That will go in long before it goes in the newsletter, long before it goes into an article on the website. It will go into the forum. So a lot of times on support, I will link some of my questions right to a support page. Okay, so pretty important to get all that kind of handled. And now let's go ahead and transition into the PS7 software, because we are here to learn some user interface. So I appreciate that time. That's a lot of pain points there, passwords and most of that I've mentioned. The wrong website and stuff that's always an issue, and I'm glad we get that handled. So when we launch PS7, you will typically see this screen here, which is the guided test toolbox. And this toolbox, completely different than 6. And in order to create this and make this work in a separate app, which is now cloud, which is now encrypted, we did have to sever the ties in PS6. So you can't get to the waveform library anymore in PS6. And it wasn't done because we don't like PS6 users or anything. We did create the software and support it for 15 years. The security wasn't nowhere near up to the task to get it to where it is today. So yes, we severed that quite a while ago. I'm going to say 14 months ago, 15 months ago, we severed it, maybe even longer than that. So we weren't really doing it to force anybody into PS7. We just did it because we had to do it to launch this new toolbox and get the app working. So let's, I'm going to come back to the guided test in a minute, but I can get to everything right here in this, in the toolbox. I'm going to go up here to my search, and I'm actually going to ask the waveform library to search maybe a waveform. Now, there is a step in there that I was already logged in. I was logged in to already show this. If you're not logged in yet, it will come up with a screen and ask for your user information and your password. You'll log that in, and then it will keep you logged in. It won't ask you for the same password, and it won't ask you. It will reset from time to time, but it's not every time you log in. I do have a scope attached. So my scope is up here. It's a 4425A-020, which happens to be a Mopar scope. And then there's my serial number for the scope. And I'm logged in here under my username. Upper right-hand corner, we have 10,077 waveforms now uploaded in. And you're going to say, where do those come from? Are they from us? They're not from us. I don't really have a real breakdown of how many waveforms Pico employees have put in, I might say 1,000, maybe it's less than that, I'm not really for sure. So the rest is uploaded by our public users, whether they're VMs or whether they're a regular public user using a regular PicoScope. That's how they get there. Now, there are minimum requirements in order to upload in. You have to fill out the information correct now. We don't just now allow anything in. You do have to fill out make and model, and you have to have channel labels and good and bad and all that. If we go to the save menu, which we should get to today, the save menu has asterisks. Those asterisks basically say you have to fill everything out before you can upload. You can upload right from PS7. You don't have to upload in this page here. You can upload right from the save menu. However, with our new waveform manager, I can go in and I can upload entire folders if I wanted to. And folder, when you press upload, it's going to check every one of those waveforms to verify that they meet the minimum requirements. And you do have a size limitation too. So try not to upload anything probably over 50 or 60 meg. It's probably going to get rejected. It does depend sometimes of the update rate as well, but there are limits for that. So just as an FYI, if you're going to do a bunch, make sure that the actual waveform itself isn't too large. So maybe don't save the entire buffer. Just say what's pertinent, and then all of those will be checked during the give you progress bars. And if one of them doesn't load or it gets rejected, it'll have a red X next to it. Now, after they are uploaded, either by multiples, and I've done like 5 at a time, and I've also done just singles along the way. Believe it or not, they go to one person, the product owner, and he's came up with this waveform library many years ago. He's our longest term Pico employee. He actually checks every one of those really before they're uploaded. He has to approve them before they're uploaded. So when you hit the upload button, they're not going to go live. Typically, it will go sometime 2 or 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. That's when he's accessing and approving those. So does that mean he could reject one of yours? Yes, he can. Does he often? I don't think he does, unless if the information looks not right. Or can you upload a page that's all just 0 volts for 2 or 3 pages? Probably not. That'll probably get rejected. And he'll contact you and say, hey, did you upload maybe the wrong waveform in the buffer or something? So yes, they're all monitored. Actually, several years ago, we took out several thousand waveforms, put them all in the new format, and now we've reached 10,000 way ahead of schedule. We reached it 3 or 4 months ahead of schedule, actually. So you have 10,000 waveforms or more. I always tell everybody, just like any search engine, just start wide and work your way narrow. So we have vehicle manufacturers that have over 1,000 or so waveforms put in here. In fact, if I can pull up a couple here. Volkswagen has 737, and then we can add Audi to that. Ford, I think, with all of their models is almost at or maybe above 1,000. Same with Stellantis, FCA, Chrysler. You add all theirs up. So there's a lot of waveforms here. Just always start narrow and then go, or start wide and then go narrow. Now, you're going to ask, okay, are there limits? Of course, there are limits. We monitor this as a monitor 24/7. So you can view, like, do I want to download this particular one that I'm looking at? I can mouse over the thumbnail, click on the thumbnail, and it's going to bring me kind of a picture that I can kind of take a look at and go, yeah, that's what I'd like to use. I want to go ahead and download that into my PS7. Maybe you don't. Either way, you can click out of that, and this is your download button on the upper right that says open. So I've highlighted it there. And once you click on that, that's going to open into your PS7. It still stays, of course, in the waveform library. It just goes into your downloads on your laptop, and then you can save that as well. You can make it a reference waveform if you want. You have limitations on how many you can do of those a day and how many of those you can do a month. It's not typically, most users will never hit the limits. I only have people hit limits because they're field service engineers and they're going from car to car to car. I've had a couple of mobile technicians get pretty close to that. Typically, the limit can be reached. You'll get a message on that says your limit's been reached, and then typically the product owner, if you're in North America, the product owner is going to contact me and say, hey, this particular email address has reached the limits. Can you reach out to them and find out what's going on? What we're trying to obviously avoid is people going in and trying to take all of the waveforms, all 10,000, believe that or not. They try that, or they'll try to take the entire make, and they'll try to take every one. You're not going to get that. Once that kind of starts, the account will get shut off, and then someone will contact you. So yes, it's not. It's something we take pretty serious. It's the largest amount of probably money we've ever spent in any sort of software package is getting the waveform library encrypted and safe and ready to go. So it is. It's got a product owner and several software engineers on it. That is their full-time job, and they'll contact those around the country, around the world, whoever's got that particular area if we have someone approaching that. So just as an FYI, we do make some exceptions to some, because I understand if you're in training, you're probably going to need some more than what the limits are. We verify all that before any of that is lifted. Okay, so I think that's enough for that. I'm going to go back to the guided test here real fast, because I do want to talk about another pain point. And since with our sponsor today, NGK, one of their type of products is one of my pain points. So we have 156 guided tests, and inside the guide, and some of you maybe you've never used a guided test because you think I know what I'm doing. I can plug in and get my triggers and get everything set and I'm ready. Some of the guided tests, about half of them, or maybe 30 or 40%, actually have embedded just-in-time videos, and those are no place else. They're not on our Pico Auto YouTube channel. They're not in Pico Auto in the training in the library. They are only in the guided tests. So the electric vehicles has them, the off-highway has them, and we've added them to some of the other ones. So they can be pretty useful, good starting point in most cases. The one I'm going to pick, I'm going to go into ignition. I'm going to pick on coil on plug. And in this case here, I'm going to go after the secondary, which is using the COP probe. We made a change about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, that created a lot of support tickets and phone calls. So using the coil on plug wand, in fact, I'm going to grab a wand here. Let's see if I can do this without messing anything up. I'm going to go ahead and share my webcam. Okay, and this is the coil on plug wand. This is we had an older one as well that had an orange handle, but this is our flexible one, and this is the new one that comes in the kits. This has been around for a while, so this one is only a BNC plus, but we have others that are just BNC if you've got one of the older scopes. So this is what I'm going to discuss. Shut my webcam back off. And in this particular case here, this is the secondary COP probe. One of the typical that I get asked is, what is up with the reading? It's reading in millivolts. It's not reading in kilovolts. You expect to see 5 or 7 or 10 kV, and I've got this probe out and I'm plugged in and I'm on this coil pack and it shows millivolts. But it's correct. We decided quite a while ago that we were not going to estimate or use some sort of algorithm to figure out what possibly the kV is, because it's not measuring the kV. It's measuring the change in the magnetic field. If you want to measure the kV, you have to remove the COP and you have to put the HT lead in between the COP and the spark plug, and then use a kV probe on that HT lead, just like we've always done. So if you want to measure it and you want to measure kV, that's how you're going to do it. This doesn't measure kV. This measures the change in the magnetic field. So you get a picture, and the picture looks really accurate compared to what we're used to, but the scaling is in millivolts because the probe, and almost all these wands are all the same. They all produce an input in the front end of the scope, millivolts. They don't put kilovolts through an attenuator into that. They use millivolts. And I think and we went to that across the board, and there's no more kV. There's no more guesstimation from us. It's millivolts, and that's what you're going to read. So it's a comparator. You compare coil pack to coil pack, run up and down the coil packs. You're after the one that doesn't look like all the rest, and that's the one you're going to focus on. I always suggest primary current. I'm not a fan of primary voltage, but I'm a fan of primary current and secondary voltage using an HT lead. And those are all in our standard or up kits. And they can also be bought separately as well. So if you have a starter kit, not a big deal. You can just go to Pico Auto and go to the accessories and you can pick those. So just something that I always mention because, again, pain point. Why isn't this reading kilovolts? And why is it reading millivolts? That's because that's the direct reading out of the probe. We don't convert it or guess what it's going to be. Well, we quit that, and I'm glad we did, actually, because it was just more of an estimation than anything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just exit out of here. I'm going to go ahead and close the guided test altogether and bring up just my scope, because I do want to spend the remaining 20 minutes to kind of run through the UI. Again, this is the basics, so I just want to make sure everybody's kind of clear where we put everything at, why we did what we did. It's all based on touchscreen, so it's a 1920 by 1080 is the resolution. Doesn't mean it doesn't work in other resolutions. That's just the one it's kind of designed for. We actually tested over a range of about 10 resolutions. But again, 1920 by 1080 would get you what I've got, which is 1920 by 1080 right here. I typically do recommend, and I get another question I get asked, what kind of computer can I run it on? Can I run it on a really old computer? No, you really can't. Sorry. Everybody wants more power. They want this. They want it to be faster. They want it to do more. And it's not going to work in a 10-year-old computer. Will it? Maybe, but is that what it's designed for? No. I tell everybody a native 10 or a native Windows 11 machine. We do support Mac. We do support Linux. Those are very, very small download numbers compared to our Windows number. So we are it's a Windows-based program, even though we do support Mac. We do support Linux. So Windows 10 native machine, probably around like a 2019 build, will get you pretty close. That's about an 8th gen Core i5, an 8th gen Intel Core i5, something around there. I'm not limiting it. I'm not saying you can't run it on a 5th gen i7. Sure, it will work, but you do have to have your ducks in a row on the computer, and you can't have a lot of background processes running. I was on a computer not long ago. I logged in, and his antivirus was 70% of his onboard memory. Of course, it's not going to run in streaming mode or anything. It's just not going to run. So anytime you have questions about computers and stuff, please just contact me either by just direct email or in support. I'm happy to help because I do a lot of computer support every day. We are a USB-based scope company, so I do a lot of it every day. So let's just run through the top toolbar. Again, top toolbar is fixed. The vertical scaling or the channels are fixed where they're at, and the more button is fixed. That the more button is right below channel D. That is fixed. Everything else underneath here is a customizable menu, so yours will not look like mine. And it's really to help the user to get everything done in 2 left mouse clicks. So again, left mouse, no right mouse, no hidden functions, no right mouse, click this, open up, scroll menus, none of that. Okay, we've tried to do everything that the end user needs to do in 2 mouse clicks. So capturing, analyzing, everything is that way. We had cases in our older software that was 5 and 6 and 7 clicks. We've tried to do it in 2. No right mouse functions yet. I wouldn't be crazy about a right mouse function. We have a lot of users that use tablets that use a stylus pen that has no right mouse. So I'm not crazy about that. I'm not super crazy about keyboard shortcuts, really. We do have the space bar for start and stop. That's really it in the scope. I do think you'll see keyboard shortcuts. We are working on those. I think they will eventually come out. So for some of you power users are like, I want my keyboard shortcuts back. I think they will come back. I just prefer, if you've got to have a lot of those kind of hidden right mouse function menus, I would personally think that the UI is not designed properly to get it done within a reasonable amount of time, which to me is like 1 or 2 mouse clicks. So across the top, we've got our start stop. I can click on it with my mouse. I can reach up. I have touchscreen. The PS7 is strictly built for touchscreen, so it's not built as PS6 was. That was not. We really couldn't incorporate any of that. Of course, that was pretty old software when it came out. It was pretty old software, been out for 15 years. And so all of our lozenges, or buttons, as we call them, lozenges here, all of them are kind of designed to be handled with the touch screen. So I always suggest, if you're gonna buy a new computer for it, I always suggest spend the extra money and get a touchscreen computer. Personally, I think it helps, but you can do either way. You can do it with a mouse as well. So start, stop, and I can also hit my space bar, and that's my my keyboard shortcut for that. And we do have a couple of new keyboard shortcuts in the NVH software. They've actually been out for quite a while now. The M for marker, the S for save. They've been around for a little bit, but that's all we've currently got in the scope function itself. So I'm just going to go from left to right here because the scope and where the sampling rate is at, and sampling itself, I'd like to spend a little time with next month. Sampling can get pretty complicated, but I'm going to point out a couple of things that I do get asked about, especially a couple of years ago when when we removed the waveform library from PS6, we obviously gained a lot more users in PS7, and we had several common questions. Probably the most part was about sampling. It was about, where is my properties tab, or where is my sample interval at? The sample interval is right here in the scope menu, and to get that menu open, I just clicked on it with my mouse, or I can reach up and hit it with my finger, and it's going to open up that. We call that a flyout menu. If you scroll down to the bottom of the time base, you're going to find the sample interval number. Now I'm just going to bring it up briefly. Sample interval is the distance or the time between sample points. So remember the old highlights magazines, and that's going to date me because, yes, I've been doing this that long, nearly almost 40 years. So that's scary, actually. Anyways, I shouldn't have said that probably. If you remember the highlights magazine where you got to connect the dots, and you would sit there and you would connect the dots, and I was always at like the dentist or something, and I don't know, that's how I remember the highlights magazine. If you had a picture and it had 10 dots, and you were done, the resolution's very low. It's gonna look like it had 10 dots. If you had one that had 1,000, the resolution is gonna be better. The reason is there's a lot less distance between the sample points. This is the same reason here. Now, did I want sample interval at the bottom of that menu? No. Did I want it someplace else? You betcha. I wanted it up top somewhere. We worked on it. We tried it. We put it in a couple places internally. That's where it ended up. Even though I'm a Pico employee and I've been a Pico user all the way back and trained Pico since PS5, which really dates me. I'm not always crazy. Sometimes it is a show of hands, and sometimes you're outvoted. So I really wanted sample intervals someplace else, but please take a note of that. And then sampling is really where the power is been added to in PS7. So it's under the hood. It's not very obvious. But what I'm going to ask, since I've got maybe 7 or 8 minutes left, I'm just going to give you a couple of notes here. Buffer memory, because I get what's the difference in the sample stuff now, because it wasn't before. Buffer memory is the old PS6 mode. It's the old sampling rate mode where when you change the time base, it changes the sample interval. So you needed the properties tab up. In PS7, we have a sample rate, which is a fixed sample rate, and it doesn't move. It doesn't change that sample interval. Once you set it, I can't say you can forget it, because that's not the case. If we could, we would, of course. But once you get your sample interval where you want it for the speed of the signal that you're dealing with, it will stay where it's at regardless of the time base. And I think that's really important, especially for our power users. So what we did on the back end is we tried to make it fairly simple. We just used some pretty simple words. If you're looking at a slow signal, you can click on slow. It's going to give you 100,000 samples a second. That's pretty low. That's less dots on that screen, obviously. If I do normal, we selected 2 million samples. Personally, I use 1, but that's just the vote. I was outvoted by 1, so we went to 2 million samples. You can use fast as well. Not a lot of signals right yet that you'd be using anything that high at 80 million samples per second. The more samples you're going to put on the graticule, on the screen, that the smaller, or the number of buffer waveforms are going to drop dramatically, obviously, because you're putting a lot of information on one screen. You put a lot less, you're going to have a lot more waveforms in the buffer. So I just think of it as a teeter-totter event, and I will certainly spend a little more time on that. And if you have any other questions like, dude, I don't want to wait another month, and I really would like to get my head wrapped around that, you're fine. Just send me an email. I'm fine to even jump on and do a quick virtual one day at lunch or on a break, and we can run through it, and we can run through it manually. I'm fine to do that. But as far as complication goes on a scope, sample rate is probably about as complicated as it gets. So I'll leave it there. I'm going to jump over to trigger real fast because there's a couple of things I really want to get done with the UI because I'm a little late. I might run a little more. Of course, I have no idea how many questions we have, but I might run a little longer. So we do have 4 trigger modes. Technically, we have 5. We do have rapid, and rapid appears when you drop below a certain time base, but generally we work with 4. And I tell everybody, if you're going to launch a scope, please start with only 2 of these. Please start with no trigger, which is a free run mode. Anything that comes in the input of the scope goes right on the screen. You can go to auto, but and auto will work. It will force the signal on the screen if there's no valid trigger point, but it looks choppy. So I get that support phone call that they've got the computer running and we're up and it's choppy, like it's slow or it's slow to respond or it's blocky. I get that word, and it's because they got auto trigger selected and there's no valid trigger point. Remember what a trigger point is. It just tells the scope when and where to begin drawing the trace. And in our case here, if I select auto, I'm going to get this yellow diamond, and I can drag the yellow diamond with my left only mouse, drag and drop, or I can use the controls down here as well, the digital controls down here. I can move it wherever I want to move it here. So again, that's a trigger point. You do have to have a valid trigger point to get the signal to stabilize. And remember, trigger in most cases is just for us. The scope doesn't really care, but for us users, trigger is important because it does stabilize the pattern and allows us to analyze it better to see if so we know where to possibly zoom in to find an issue that directs our diagnosis. So trigger stabilizes the pattern. It is manually set by you, and you have to verify what source, what channel you're going to be on, and verify the level where you're going to put it, the slope or the direction, and how far you're off on the left-hand edge. So triggers really never change. It's really for us. We might have changed the name slightly, but not much. So those 2 are what I call safe triggers, none and auto. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put a signal in here real fast. And if I've selected none and I'm looking at the screen that you're looking at, of course, it's not stable. It's not triggered. I've got no trigger. What comes in is what goes on the screen. If I do auto and I don't have a valid trigger point, you'll notice that my channel is now, what they're doing is it fills one channel in. It doesn't see a valid trigger point, so it throws that up on channel A, and then it will alternate and go over to B, and it throws up B once it fills the buffer up. And so it does look choppy, or it does look blocky, but it's giving you what you need. You have to just determine where am I going to set the trigger point at. In this case here, if we just lower it down, I'm going to just drag and drop it. I'll lower it down, and it will stabilize my, in this case here, my it's just a digital, it's a frequency modulated signal on the top. So next month we're going to do cam and crank. So please return for that. We'll do some cam and crank, and we'll add some math channels, and we'll do a little more work right where we're at here today. But you've got something that's valid because I got a valid trigger point. Once you go to repeat is when I get phone calls. If you got a valid trigger point and it's a repeating pattern, you're fine. It's when it's not a valid trigger point. What happens is the scope freezes. Well, the scope's not really froze. It's just waiting for the signal on channel A, that's my source, to reach that yellow diamond, and it's not reaching it. So it's waiting. The scope's on green, so we're running, and so I get my scope freezes, and I restart the computer, and it works for a while, and then it freezes again because we're on auto trigger. We went from auto or none, we went to repeat, and repeat does require a valid trigger point. So I call that, sometimes it's not always forgiving. Now, as a power user, you're like, yeah, I made that mistake like 10 years ago, dude. Well, I understand that, but we have a lot of new users, and they've maybe never used trigger before. And so if you're going to use a trigger point, you got to make sure it's valid. So I tell everybody, never use your startup settings with a repeat or a single trigger, because single trigger is even worse. Single trigger is it's only going to swipe that screen and fill that buffer once, only when it sees a valid trigger point. So right here, if I pull it down and it sees a valid trigger point, it swipes it for that one particular waveform in the buffer, and it stops the scope automatically because it's waiting for you to make a decision. Is that what you wanted? Are you going to save it? Do you need to change something? Maybe that's not the sensor you need to be on, and maybe we're moving a different direction because that's not where the problem is. But those are your 4 triggers, and 2 of them I always find is they're just not very forgiving. You've got to be pretty close. We only have really 1 guided test out of our 156 that I'm aware of that uses a single trigger, and that's for relative compression. So when you're snapping the high amp clamp or on the battery cable and you're running the relative compression test, which by the way is one of our 2 top guided tests that's opened, then the polarity of the clamp clearly is important, because that trigger point, it will be set above the 0 line. And if the amp clamp is flipped reverse polarity and it goes downwards, it goes negative, guess what? The test never starts. The screen never starts because the valid trigger point is never reached. Okay. I'm going to go back to none for now, I think, and I'll restart this here. And this is our waveform buffer. So this is the like the onboard recording, the movie, so to speak. Here's the easiest way to describe this is I've got 10 waveforms in the buffer. Now remember, it's teeter-totter. It's based upon how many channels I have open, and it's based upon how my sampling is set. Is it buffer memory or is it fixed sample rate? And then what that number is. So you can increase and decrease that by the number of sample points you're going to put per each waveform. Now I've got 12 here, and I'm highlighted on 12. So think about it this way. It doesn't matter what the number. It could be 25, it could be 30, it could be 64. It doesn't matter. It's in my case here, I'm on computer number 12, and there's 11 computers to my left. And this, if I would scroll down with my chair to computer number 11, that's what that computer is going to show. That's what that screen is going to show, on so forth and so forth, all the way down to 1, which is a computer 11 down from me to my left. So that's kind of how the buffer works. And so as you start and stop the scope, it clears the buffer, and it continues to make fill in those buffers for those waveforms, so you can stop the scope and you can scroll through and you can look. And you may say, well, could you miss something between those buffers? Yes, you can. How do you fix that? Well, you can fix it 2 ways. You can do a rapid trigger, which is very low time base, or you can just increase your sampling or increase your scope time base. I'm at 20 milliseconds per division here. You can simply just increase that into streaming mode. So if I increase this, let's just increase it to 1 second per division. The goal here, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the scope. The goal is to put as much data on the screen that is manageable, and I mean manageable because the file size can get very large, and then you can use the zoom function up here to zoom in and out, and you're not even really using a trigger. So 2 schools of thought. I run into a lot of people that really don't know much about trigger because they just dump everything on the screen, and they do it by a very long time basis. That's fine. There are no issues with that. You do a lot of zooming in and out, and then you can save that particular capture and make changes as you save it, so you can find it pretty quick. I have others that use the trigger, and they'll save it based upon the trigger. They'll use that waveform based upon the trigger. You can do both. Can't do both at the same time, but you can do both. And so it doesn't matter your approach. There's validity to both approaches. Okay, so the rest of this across the top, and then I'll finish here at the top, and then we'll turn it over. I'll just turn it back over to Philip to get some questions, and don't worry about some of the rest of this. We got plenty of material, and we'll discuss. Wherever we leave off is where we'll start next month. So we can get to the waveform library right here, right at 12 o'clock. We can get to the guided test toolbox right there as well. Auto setup just snaps the vertical scaling to try to fit the waveforms as best possible, as estimated by the PicoScope software engineers to get everything on the screen. So generally, it's not super useful if you've been using a scope for a while, but if you're new, you can always press the auto setup and it'll get everything kind of placed in the screen, so it's not really messy in case your vertical scaling is set too low. You can open files. You can do our new save menu here, and I'll watch this open here. Our new save menu is just in this early access right now. The old save menu is still in stable. So when we increment the next stable, it will have this new save menu. Again, we've added some things to it. It's early access, so we added mileage, we added hours for off-highway equipment. We've added some new vehicle types. You'll notice some of these have asterisks, and these are the ones I talked about when we were talking about the waveform library. You have to fill out the asterisk in order for the lower left-hand corner is to go live, or to switch from gray to blue. Then you can upload it once this is all created. I'm going to go ahead and cancel back out of this. Print, of course, vehicle details, and then full screen. I'll end at full screen. This is a live full screen. I can start the scope. I use my space bar to start it because I don't have any of my toolbars are all gone. And it's a live screen. So my rulers are still here with me in the upper left-hand corners. They're color-coded rulers, about the same as that we had in PS6 for the most part, slightly larger so you can get them with a finger, not necessarily have to use a mouse. And the same for our horizontal triggers as well. And we can also use the zoom function. So all that is done, and you can get rid of all of your toolbars, which is nice. Nice for me when the computer's in the car and I'm out, or it's underneath the hood and I'm looking underneath the hood inside the car. Anything like that, especially as you get older, believe it or not, for you young guys, the eyes will actually start to get worse eventually. So I'm going to go ahead, and to exit out, it's not the escape key. Never say the escape key to software engineers, I'll blow a gasket. It's function 11, or you can just run the mouse up to the 12 o'clock position. You'll get this bar here, and I'll exit back out. Okay, so that leads me to about 3 minutes. I'm going to stop my scope, and let's go ahead and open that up for questions.
All
and
right.
I'll look whatever we got here.
Okay, nice job, Randy. We have a couple questions here. First question from Keith. Why did Pico decide to use the user interface that made the usable working area of the scope smaller than version 6? That's a good question.
Okay, that's actually incorrect. At 1920 by 1080, the working screen size is about 3% larger. Now, on some resolutions, it will be slightly smaller, but in PS6, we never had full screen mode, and we knew we were adding full screen mode from the beginning. So now we can get rid of all the toolbars and click the full screen mode, which we've done for almost over 3 years. So if you really want to test me, take whatever computer you've got, take a measuring device, open up PS6 and measure just the graticule and nothing else, and leave your properties tab off, and then measure what's in PS7. And most of the resolutions, it's actually slightly larger, because if you can recall, we took up space off the horizontal, but we added it to the vertical. So once you times them together, which I have done, by the way, on almost every computer I own, using a pretty precise measuring device, it's actually slightly larger, especially in 1920 by 1080. And it really doesn't matter, because we got full screen mode. We can punch full screen mode and all that goes away, and of course it's larger. So, and we knew that from the beginning. We just couldn't do it in PS6. Okay, go ahead.
All right, great. So it's a matter of the full screen mode. Done. All right, now the next question is, what is the size limit for saved waveforms that can be uploaded to the library?
Great question. I'm going to tell you, and I could be wrong, but I'm going to tell you it's somewhere between 50 and 60 megabytes. So here's what I tell everybody. When you go to save your buffers, in fact, I'll do it right here. I'll go to save the buffer. I've still got my screen up, thankfully. It's going to estimate the file size. So if you see I'm over here, I don't know if you can see my mouse. In fact, let's just do this. Let's do this here. I'm over here. So saving a file of approximate size 96 Megabytes. Okay, that's not going to go into the waveform library. So you're going to have to decide how much of that you're going to pick. There's 6 waveforms in that buffer. And generally, you're picking just the last 1 or 2 anyways. So you can go in and you can select choose the range or current. One thing I do, and I found out the hard way, that is approximate only. And that could be off 20% or more. It's not the easiest thing to approximate until the save button is actually done. So I just tell everybody, look at the approximate size, and if you're close to 60 or 70 and you do the upload and it doesn't go, it'll tell you file size too large. You'll have to go back in and probably take maybe 1 out of your buffer, or at least make sure your size is below 50 or 60. Great question, really. We don't list that. We'd like to really increase that, but you know what that does? That increases the file size of the storage capabilities of 10,000 waveforms. And that's something that we pay pretty dearly for every month, to be honest with you. So that's not going to get done easy. So that's why we have a limit.
Okay, another question similar to that too, related to PS6 waveform library. As far
Okay,
as
so
from the PS6 waveform library brought across to the PS7 library.
right, so everything that was in, it's the same library. It's just there's no access from PS6. The only thing we did changing from 6 to 7 into a toolbox, we did eliminate about 1,900 waveforms that did not either logically make any sense, or they didn't have any of the minimum vehicle types or engine displacement and all that. So we did remove about 2,000 waveforms, and that was done quite a while ago. Otherwise than that, it is the same waveform library. So it's the same 6,000 or 7,000 that was there back then, minus the ones we removed, we've added to it. But there's no more link from 6 to 7, as I stated. The security in 6 is not very good. So that was one of the primary reasons for getting this toolbox fixed and operational, is to get rid of, so we can encrypt it, because it was under attack 7 days a week, to be honest with you. But we had tendencies where we'd have to shut off entire countries to try to stop them from creating bots to get in to steal as much as they could. And I'm not talking 1 or 2 waveforms. I'm talking 250 at a time. So that's all been done just to encrypt and secure the waveform library.
Okay, great. And will Pico 7 support an 8-channel Pico?
Yes, absolutely. Our 4823 is absolutely supported.
Okay.
Gets pretty crowded. Don't use it on a small tablet. Use it on a larger, take your computer and HDMI it over to a much larger screen, because you get 8 channels running. It gets busy. It gets busy on the screen. It gets busy on the car. So watch everything, because remember, an 8-channel 4823 is a common ground scope. So keep an eye on everything, because you don't want differential voltage going over 20 or 30 volts. You're going to create a problem with 4823s. So most of my power users are well aware of common ground versus a floating ground scope, because if they bought it, they might have received some instruction from me or a phone call from me or something along the way, just to verify.
Okay. And you mentioned about saving a single buffer to keep the waveform size small so you could upload it to the library. But can you
Yes.
explain to Thomas just how to save one specific buffer page when the file has 30?
Sure.
So buffer page.
Sure. So, okay. So here, I'll just example here. I'm watching my screen. It's got to catch up to me here. Okay. So I'm back to my screen. I've got 6 waveforms in the buffer, and I'm on 6 of 6. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and let my save menu up. The software isn't really not that old or slow. We just got an internet delay here. And so I can select all. So I'm over here on the left-hand side. So I'm going to do this real fast. I'm over here on the left-hand side. So I've got all. I can do all 6. That's going to get me 96. I can do just the current one, which is the one that is currently on the screen. That's number 6 of 6. Or I can select a range. Now, if I choose my range, I may decide, in most cases, you're probably taking just a few of them, because you've seen the problem and you reached over and you've hit the space bar, or you stopped the scope, and probably you're not maybe picking the last one, but maybe you're picking somewhere in there. I can pick 3, -4, that's going to get me screen number 3 and screen number 4, and it's still going to give me a pretty large size because I'm at a very large sample rate at this particular point. So keep an eye on your size. That's not going to poke through a phone line either. So you do have to keep an eye on the size. I get a lot of support try to send me something through the support system, and it's not going to go through an email attachment because that's actually too large. So keep an eye on your sample rate. That's why we use 2 million samples as normal, because that will actually allow you to put a lot of waveforms saved that you can actually send through an email, send on an email attachment. Hopefully that answers that. Okay, what else we have?
Yes, there were some questions about the next webinar. It will be June 5th, same time, and I'm going to put the link in the chat box for everyone to have. And the last question related to what you covered here is there's some factory users like the Mercedes-Benz factory kit. And
Yep.
the question is, can you access the waveform library with the PicoScope that comes with that kit?
Okay, so great question. Branded scopes are pretty tricky. So we call them a branded scope, like I'm using a Mopar scope, so it doesn't look like a public scope. And we have a lot of them. And a lot of them have different rules of what they'll attach, what they'll communicate with. And that is set not by Pico, that is set by the VM. So if Mercedes decides they want their scope to be locked, their scope isn't locked, by the way, but if they want it locked, it's locked only to their software. So if you plug it into the Exentry software, and the software doesn't have waveform library in it, and I already know that it doesn't because the Exentry software is really old, it's really behind, and again, it's not a Pico issue. That's just how some VMs do things. Then they can't access it. You'd have to use public software outside or off of the Exentry machine in order to gain access to it. It will access the waveform library fine, not inside their software. So if you run across a scope, especially on eBay or something like that, and it's a branded scope, be careful, because a lot of branded scopes are locked to their software, and you're not going to get their software off of Pico Auto, and you're not going to get it from me either, because we technically don't own it, they do. And if they don't release it on their websites, then you're not going to get it easy. And if PicoScope is branded on the web on an eBay, I'm looking at it anyways, because yes, they do get stolen and they get stuck on eBay, and a lot of times they're locked scopes. And when you see those eBay auctions close early, that's because something's not going to go well for them. Okay, so yes, I'm one of those that do that, and I'll get the property authorities involved. Once we find the owner, everything's done through the serial number. I know it's been stolen. We walk it back. I'm going to just be honest with you. A lot of times it's an ex-employee. They're very easy to find, and they are in trouble. So you want to stay away from a branded scope unless if there's a history that you can confirm. Please contact me via support@picotech.com, because like some GM dealers and some Stellantis dealers and some dealers have been closed over thanks to COVID. They're closed, and their stuff got liquidated. And I know those serial numbers, and I know they were liquidated, and I know they were legitly sold in the used market, and that's fine, not a problem. Unfortunately, that's not always how things go. So if you have questions about a branded scope, please just contact support or just send me an email at randy.dillman@picotech.com.
Okay, great. Well, this brings our first session to a close. Thank you for the 193 that stayed on for the additional questions. We held most of the audience most of the time. The follow-up questions, we're going to follow up via email because we don't want to miss anything out. Some really other good questions that came through. Part 2 has been posted in the chat. And yes, you will receive an email within an hour after this, along with a survey with that information as well. But through your normal channels of how you received it before, will continue the same way. But that new link for June 15th, part 2, advanced settings and tech tips along the lines of what we've already covered with the P7 software, will be the next webinar. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. And don't forget about the handout. Yes, we do have a handout. Feel free to download it here under handouts. It's a 14-page document. Some time has been put into this so that you could have a good recap for when you review this webinar. So it's under handouts. Feel free to download this before you exit out. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Randy. You're the man.
Yes, sir.
We'll see
Thanks for
you
having me.
in June 5th.
Okay, thanks everyone. Everybody have a good rest of the week.
All righty. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.